Welcome to On the JoB with your host, Lynn Parrish, editor of the Journal of Business. On the JoB is about the Inland Northwest business community, where you'll hear firsthand the backstories from the men and women reporters at the Journal of Business. On the JoB is brought to you in part by McNeese Wheeler Attorneys. Here's Lynn.
Hi, good morning. Welcome to On the JoB with Lynn Parrish. That's me, and I'm here today with Leanne Bierken, Journal of Business reporter. Welcome, Leanne.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Yeah, good to have you. So, Leanne, you wrote a story this time for us about trends in sexual harassment training, and wanted to talk to you a little bit about that today. What did you find in your reporting in terms of that trend?
Okay, so with this piece and given the national conversation that's going on, we had wanted to do a piece on kind of capturing what employers are talking about now, given all of the scandals in the national headlines.
Right.
So for this story, my main source was Associated Industries of the Inland Northwest, which is a employer consulting service that assists their clients with matters pertaining to employment law.
Mm-hmm.
So from my discussions with them, they had talked about how the majority of employers are going to have these policies already in place. So what a lot of them are looking to do right now is make sure that their policies are updated and that all of their employees are aware and understand how those policies work.
Sure.
So the trend right now, given the national conversation, they did sound like they have seen an increase in employers that are interested in at least revisiting their policies, I would say. So in comparison to the amount of trainings and policy reviews that they did last year, it sounded like this year things have increased by at least 50%.
Yeah, 50%. That's quite an increase in inquiries. Now, you talked to a few employers as well.
I did.
Were they clients of Associated Industries or just other people that you reached out to?
One was a client of Associated Industries recently, and the other I had just reached out to on my own. So the two employers that I had spoken with for this piece were Avista and Wendell Motors.
Okay, good.
So in talking with Avista, they're another of our area's largest employers, and they had talked with me about how they view this national conversation again as a way of looking at those policies again and just reiterating for employees that these are what our policies are, and this is how you would go about reporting a complaint if you do have something that we should be aware of. So while their policies haven't changed, they sounded like in light of the national conversation, they have sent out additional communications just to ensure that all of their employees are aware of what their policies are. As far as Wendell Motors, this year in their annual review of their policies, they had decided that it might be better to ask Associated Industries to stop in for a live presentation because they just kind of felt that what they've done in the past is have employees and supervisors view videos and take a written test at the end just to ensure understanding of the information. But that kind of presentation doesn't always
Foster a conversation. It sounded
exactly,
like, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So they felt like this year going with a live presentation would kind of give up an opportunity for employees to engage more and ask more questions.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And it sounded like the employers, from reading your piece, it sounded like the employers didn't attribute it directly to the national scandals, but that clearly those were part of what made it top of mind.
Exactly,
Yeah.
So all of them were pretty clear that, these are the kind of thing that it's just good policy to revisit some of these things occasionally, and even just on an annual basis, just make sure that everything's working correctly and
Yeah.
that people understand it. But given some of the discussions that are happening, it's always a good idea to just revisit that understanding.
Sure, sure. Now, what kind of data did you find in terms of not training but actual complaints specific to sexual harassment?
So it was kind of interesting to me that there really wasn't a whole lot of data out there, people really willing to track this kind of information.
Sure.
Some of the sources that I had went to were the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So all of their data, of course, is a little bit older, nothing for 2017 yet, but what I had found through their website was that last year they had resolved almost 29,000 cases of employment discrimination based on sex. So that was up from 27,000 claims that they had resolved in 2015.
On a national level?
Yes.
Yeah. And so did you see any data farther back than that, like 29,000 historically? How does that, is that a lot or not very many?
Well, looking back at their data, it seemed to me that the 10-year peak for total claims that the agency had reported was around 32,000 back in 2011.
Okay. So not historically high, but still up toward
Yep,
the
still
higher
up
end
from
of-
last year, but not necessarily larger than it's ever been.
Sure. Now, when we talk about training, my mind first goes toward telling people what they're not supposed to do, but it also, training also will tell people what to do if they are a subject of sexual harassment. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
And so one of the more interesting things I thought about the piece was talking about what constitutes sexual harassment. Can you go into that a little bit for us?
I can try.
Yeah. It got pretty
well,
in-depth pretty fast, didn't
yeah.
it? Yeah.
So in talking with some of the attorneys at Associated Industries, they had talked about that there's two types of harassment that they see. One is the quid pro quo, where you have someone who is expecting to get something out of an interaction. So you might have a victim that puts up with a behavior to avoid a negative outcome or to conceivably gain a benefit. So what they were telling me they see more of is actually the second type, which are behaviors that lead to a hostile work environment. So these can be small things like unwanted physical contact, maybe it's like a pat on the back, or people just getting a little too much in your space. But whatever it is, some of these behaviors might be considered more minor, or maybe someone tells an offhand joke, and so it just seems like a one-time lapse in judgment kind of thing. But the point that they were discussing was that it's when those behaviors become frequent and continue to make someone uncomfortable, and they're clearly discriminating against this victim based on their sex, or the employer is aware of the behavior and is tolerating it somehow, or when it's affecting the victim's employment status.
Sure. So when you talk about affecting employment status, it's certain things happening as with the suggestion that it could influence whether they can be employed there anymore, right?
Just that implied undertone of, if I speak up, is this going to lead to me being terminated, or
And I really need this job, sure.
or other behaviors that, maybe you're not going to get a promotion, something like that.
Right, pretty insidious. So it's good that these conversations are occurring more frequently. Did your sources say anything about holiday parties? Here we are, days from Christmas as we're recording.
I did ask about that. They did tell me that they have heard from a couple employers that were, concerned with holiday parties coming up, because a lot of companies like to host their party off-site and serve alcohol. People get a couple drinks in them, and inhibitions are lowered. So there were a couple people asking them for advice on that, and some of the suggestions were, you could scale back your holiday parties a little bit, maybe plan a smaller gathering at your office during daylight hours and don't serve alcohol. That could be an option. But otherwise, they said overall, employers should be just talking with their employees and making sure that they understand, these policies still apply even if you aren't at work and you're not currently working.
Mm-hmm.
You are still an employee at a work function.
Good. Well, thanks for coming in and talking to us about this, Leanne. Let's keep on looking for sources of data on this, because I think it's something that would be good for us to explore further in the future.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining us today. We'll be back again soon. Take care.
The following is sponsored by our friends and community supporters at McNeese Wheeler Attorneys. McNeese Wheeler is a boutique law firm in Spokane, handling matters in both Washington and Idaho. Areas of law include business law, wills, trusts and estates, family law, personal injury and wrongful death, and real estate matters. For your full-service legal needs, contact McNeese Wheeler Attorneys. On the JoB is produced in Spokane, Washington by SpokaneTalksOnline.com, which is solely responsible for its content. On the JoB is brought to you by our friends at McNeese Wheeler Attorneys. Ask Lynn a question, recommend a guest, and hear this program again online anytime at SpokaneTalksOnline.com.